Are you looking to improve your executive presence and be recognized as the leader in your field? Our guest today is Dr. Alexa Chilcutt, and she is an executive coach, and she serves as the faculty lead for the Executive Business Communication Certificate and co-lead for the Academy of Women in Leadership programs at Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. She is an expert in leadership and team communication, public speaking, and also executive presence. And so today we're going to explore the 10 characteristics of executive presence and how to grow your confidence, be recognized as a leader in your field. And I'm really excited to have her here today. Alexa, welcome to the Leaders Transformation.
I'm glad to be here, Nicole. Thank you for inviting me.
It is a pleasure. And, it's funny because we're both wearing blue. And so that is just for those watching, this is not a requirement for executive presence. that was not planned.
Right. Actually, if I would have gone for red, right? If we're really talking about
power color.
Power. There you go.
Yeah. So let's do a shout out also to Mark Hayward, and he's the one who connected us. So thank you, Mark, for the amazing introduction, because Alexa and I wouldn't be talking if it weren't for you. And I actually had the opportunity to introduce Alexa to a couple of other people. Amazing guests have also been on this show. And so I love how those connections work, and they just continue to pay it forward. So thank you, Mark, for that. So Alexa, let's talk about a little bit more about what you do. I kind of gave a brief overview, but tell us a little bit more about what you do and why it's so important in the world we live in right now.
Well, so as you said, I teach executive education for Johns Hopkins Carey Business School and some other institutions, and do corporate trainings, do a little coaching on the side. And I've transferred, really. I used to teach undergraduates at the University of Alabama, loved that as well, but always kept my foot kind of in that professional world because I'm a very applied person. So my background was in advertising and PR. And so just the idea of executive presence and how we, as professionals, understand that perception is reality, but also how do we build and cultivate perceptions that really speak to the leader that we are. And so that's why it's so important. And I think today it's important because one key piece about this executive presence and the characteristics is authenticity. And so how do we lead authentically? How do we lead from a strengths-based approach on who you are and your values, how you want to lead or be perceived as a leader?
Yeah. So I know there's leaders that are very capable, and aspiring leaders, maybe even, that are very capable, that get passed up specifically because of their lack of executive presence. So we're going to talk about the characteristics. Let's talk about the lack of those characteristics and the impact that it can have. I'm sure you've seen that quite often.
Well, and research actually shows us. I mean, there was a journal article that was talking about a survey of over 400 CEOs, corporate communication executives, and professional development managers. And out of those 400 surveyed, 89% believed that perceived a high level of perceived executive presence absolutely contributed to career advancement. 78% of those surveyed stated that the perception of a lack of presence holds people back. And at the same time, the Center for Talent and Innovation did a study where they found out that 81% of the individuals given feedback about their lack of executive presence were really unclear about how to proceed. So we don't even really know how to communicate about executive presence, and what aspects are people missing?
Yeah, it's a thing that we know it's there, and it's like putting your finger on it, which is what you do, is right, getting your finger on it to say, oh, it's this, and how do we measure that? It's like certain people walk in the room and they just look like they own the place. And you're like, what is that? It's confidence. Okay, well, how do I break that down into something that I can learn and apply and, and teach to others even, within the organization. So maybe let's talk about some of those characteristics that you've seen are the most essential. Like there's 10. Okay. So
we don't have to go into all 10.
Yes. Where do we start? with that,
Yeah.
because that can sound
Well,
overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh.
yeah,
Yeah.
nobody needs a list. Nobody needs a list of 10. But to your point, just bringing up the idea of confidence and walking into a room and owning it. And I think that's what people have focused on a lot. And so I want to kind of move away from that a little bit. Yes, that is absolutely part of it. But we think about executive presence, let's say, 10, 20 years ago when we were talking about executive presence, we really were thinking about that kind of Mad Men archetype, right? The bravado, the hubris, the confidence, owning the space, all of that. And absolutely, that makes a very strong first impression. But the research that I actually focused on that was conducted by an Australian group of researchers, what I like about their research is that they found that there are short-term evaluations, and those short-term initial impressions or evaluations about someone's executive presence are things like projected confidence, engagement skills, status and reputation. Because you think about it, somebody's status and reputation kind of precedes them into the room. Appearance. And when we talk about appearance, the way that research broke it down was it was more about looking the part, whatever that part may be, grooming. So just looking kind of put together. And of course, it's not prescriptive. So you shouldn't wear this type of thing and look like this, because it's all about business culture too, and your own personality and style. But do you look put together? And so those are really those, and engagement skills was one of those, communication skills. Those first five were those initial kind of short term. We meet somebody, they make a great, strong first impression, all of that. The last five were about evaluations over time. And this is where the rubber meets the road for a leader, because they can make a great first impression. But what is leadership? Leadership is about how we engage with, align, and move people to act, right? We have to build trust and rapport, our values. We have to really tap into that to get people to move with us. And this is where those other five characteristics really sit, is what are those aspects or those characteristics of a leader that have people buy into them. And so it's things like interpersonal integrity. So engagement skills, I might meet you for the first time and act like I'm really interested and want to know about you, but a week later, I don't know your name and I don't remember anything about you. So interpersonal skills are that true, authentic investment in people. Another one is values in action. People want to see that a leader portrays those values in action. If they say they value something, are their actions mirroring that? Intellect and expertise are some of the other ones. Are you the person that has that information? And so that's really what I love about this kind of unpacking of executive presence, is that we're able to see that those short-term impressions are good, but those long-term impressions are what help us to maintain the persona that we want to create, if it's authentic to who we are.
Yeah, it's like it's going beyond the charisma of like,
Yeah.
wow, I'm impressive. When
Yeah.
when you walk into a room, my dad used to have this saying. He said, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and then you
Mm-hmm.
better know something.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like the okay, so you got in the door, and now what, right? Do you actually know something about what you're doing? Are you? I love that interpersonal integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and you are who you say you are, and you're following through. You appear to care, or do you really care? Those
Right.
types of things that make all the difference. So yeah. And when we talk about executive presence, I think a lot of people think of that presence of that persona, like how am I going to show up visibly? And it's more than that. Now let's talk about that in terms of appearance, because I'm tall. I don't know if you are or not.
I'm not.
No, how tall are you?
I'm about 5'3".
5'3". Okay, so
Yeah.
this is perfect, right? Because I've had people actually say to me, "Oh, you know what? God gave you this stature for a reason, and there's an authority that comes with it, and so forth." And I'm like, "Okay, but what about the people that didn't have the height?"
Yeah.
So and some people use that as an excuse, right? And they'll say, "Well, I don't have it because I don't have that." size, so I get looked over. Talk a little bit about how do you deal with that? And when you're like 5'3", I mean, other than wearing 5-inch heels, walk
Yeah.
in and really command a
Hold the
room
space.
and
Yeah.
call and hold the space. Yeah.
Mhm. And this is one of the things when we teach executive education, it is let's think about and unpack what those characteristics are, but then we really have to, what are we sending people away with? They need to know about the values in action, and they really need to have that moment. We work through it of identifying the impressions that you want to make. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? All of that. But at the end of that, it is about helping them build some skills that we can help them build in that time. And many times it focuses around those nonverbal communication skills
Mm-hmm.
and projected confidence and interpersonal engagement, all of those things, and verbal communication skills as well, which are really important. But so what do you do? I mean, I personally at 5'3" may not need heels and can own the space. But my background is dancing. And so I think that as someone with a performative background, you kind of feel like you can manage that space. But it doesn't have to do with stature. And working with people, when you ask people about who is someone that has really impacted you and you see them as someone with executive presence, or one of the best questions is, who's someone that over time has proven to you that they're a kind of a force of a leader, they've got that presence, but you initially didn't think that they had that. And I have listened to stories of participants bringing up women in particular, who were smaller, who were shorter, who were maybe quieter, but then watching their leadership over time, they showed themselves to be in command of a meeting or that kind of thing. But we can all work on that. How do we take just assessment of what are we putting out there to begin with? That's huge. Like,
Yeah.
where are we?
Yeah.
Take an assessment of your body language. Are you sitting up? Are you hunched down? Are you walking in, looking at your phone? Are you looking out? How are you showing up on Zoom?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because all of this is communicating to other people, whether you are confident, you're engaged. And so it's a lot about taking stock of what are the messages you're currently sending, and then what are some new behaviors that you can try on that allow you to feel more confident, and you're kind of showing that confidence as well.
Yeah. Let's talk about women actually in that, because
Yeah.
you brought it up. Even like not just, but women they have we hear so often, I should say, that there's like this glass ceiling and women don't get that opportunity to move up as fast, right, as others.
Yeah.
And some will argue and say, nope, haven't experienced that, right? And others are like, I totally experienced that. And there's different dynamics, the environment that they're in, the culture that they're in.
Absolutely.
And maybe that some of it is actually having to do with some executive presence, the skills or the lack thereof, to be
Mhm.
able to present themselves. What are your thoughts on that, specifically as it relates to women, and how they can develop the presence that they need?
I have plenty of thoughts, but I will focus on what I think is really, really important for
Yeah.
women. Not that it isn't important for other people, but and I work with a lot of women through the Academy for Women in Leadership at Johns Hopkins. And we think, especially as women, I believe that our work speaks for itself. We are in a position, we are doing good work.
Yeah.
Um, don't people see the excellence of my work? I'm producing, I'm doing these things. And we're not always really good advocates for ourselves. And yes, we can put on, a little better polish on our confidence and look the part. All of those things do matter. But one of the most powerful things that women can adopt is an idea of having this advocacy for themselves in leadership, identifying opportunities to talk about their accomplishments to individuals who are going to make those decisions. So, Carla Harris, who was a VP, retired VP of Morgan Stanley, who I admire greatly. But she has this thing where she says, what are people saying about you when you're not in the room? Because that's where all those decisions are being made about compensations, about promotions, about, new positions. And so identifying the people that are not in that room or the people that are above you who have an opportunity to influence people who will be in that room, and taking strategic opportunities to talk about the things that you've done. It's not, I think we want to be humble and that's all lovely and everything. But what I tell women is, it's not that people are not trying to notice you, or it's not that they're trying not to notice you, right?
Mhm.
It's that they're so busy doing what they're doing.
Yeah. They're just
And
not noticing you there because they've got
the,
all these other things that are
yeah.
taking their attention. Hmm.
And if you're quietly doing excellent work over here, that's wonderful. But we do have to increase our own visibility.
Yeah.
And, and so one of the things that I help people with is, okay, think of a previous project, an initiative you've led, a team that you led. What's something that you can say, okay, here was the situation with the company or the organization. Here's what I was tasked with. Here are the actions that I took, that nice little star method. And here were the results. And create a 1 minute pitch. This is a great activity. It's a good exercise. Create a 1 minute pitch that follows those. And then when you create opportunities to advocate for yourself through a story, tell the
So
story
what would
of,
be an opportunity like that they could use that?
yeah, I mean, let's just think of, we've all heard of the elevator pitch, right?
Yes.
You get in the elevator with somebody, da 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 da. All right, well, think about, it's not out of the ordinary for you to be walking up and down the hall or on a meeting with somebody, or maybe even get in an elevator and they say, "Oh, Nicole, tell me what you've been up to," or, how are things? How's work? And our usual response is, "Oh, it's great. I got." But if this is a person of influence, you could say, "Oh, wow, I love that I have this moment with you. I'm sure that, you've got so many things going on, but I'd love to tell you about this last initiative that I helped spearhead and our outcomes were, what we achieved." And so it is creating those opportunities, but also creating those opportunities with your supervisor, your CEO. If you ever have regular meetings, talk about yourself. It's a good thing,
Yeah.
because you have to train people to see you in a leadership realm.
Yeah. Well, I think of it like some people have like an unconscious competence around that where they just naturally do
Mm.
that. And maybe
Mhm.
men do that, not to stereotype, but they
Sure.
will tend to do that a little bit more and speak to their accomplishments more than women will. And I actually heard once, I think there was a guest on this show that said that men, when they're looking to get that next promotion, they'll talk about their potential, and
Mm.
women will base it based on even whether or not they actually apply for the promotion is based on whether or not they've done it before, which
Mm.
is a big difference because then obviously you're limiting yourself. Because like, well, I haven't really done that, or I've done a portion of it, but I haven't done all of it. So I don't know that I'd be able to do that. And men are like, put me in, coach, man, I'll do it.
That's
Like,
right.
I'll figure it out. And
That's
I think part of that is, it's that confidence in yourself. Right. And so, but when you were talking about that, I was thinking about like the debrief, how often there's that opportunity to debrief how things have been working. And well, we
right.
accomplished this, we did this, we did that. And, it's like, wow, I didn't realize all that was happening behind the scenes. I just tasked you with it and expected you to get it done. And rather than just saying, yeah, we did it and it worked out okay, but to literally speak to that, I think that's really like practical. I'm thinking about things that
Yeah.
we can take away as practical. Okay, so I leave this conversation. What can I do when we get to the end of this? Like, what do I do that will help me tomorrow?
Okay.
To step
Well,
in. Mm-hmm.
here's a super practical thing. This is what first step, right, for impression management. Answer these two questions. The first one is, if I were to poll the people, survey those that your colleagues laterally, your supervisors, anybody up, or direct reports. If I were to survey the people that you work with professionally and ask them to give me 3 adjectives to describe you, What adjectives do you think people are currently using to describe you? Now, they can be positive. Now, you write that down. Now, I want you to think about your ideal self. What is it? Maybe it's that next step. Maybe it's that next, whatever that is. Or you're in this leadership position. You just want to shift the way that people are perceiving you. Okay, envisioning that ideal self. When you're not in the room, what is it that you would most desire people to use adjective wise to describe you? So you've got the three that are current and the three that you would like to shift. And a lot of times they're things like, well, I'm seen as dependable, but I want to be seen as strategic. I'm seen as creative, but I want to be seen as innovative. And that is the first step. So now I've got my three adjectives that I really want others to use when describing me. How do I start behaving? What kind of actions do I take around that? And how do I use that language? So if I want to be seen as innovative or strategic, then when I'm creating that pocket story, that kind of elevator pitch about myself, I'm going to use that language. You gave us this task and I gathered a team together and I really led this strategic initiative to move, also be okay with saying I. And as women, I think we're always wanting to say we. And
Mm-hmm.
it's wonderful that we're collaborative and use we, but it's also okay to say what you did and
Mm-hmm.
to own that, right? But using that language to describe yourself, that shifts people's mindset. So that is one thing everybody can take away. How do people perceive you currently? How would you want them to perceive you? And then how do you go about creating and maintaining those types of impressions?
Yeah, I love that. It's like, well, first of all, you got to be aware of how people are perceiving you, right? First
Yeah.
step to transformation is awareness. And then I have a choice. What am I going to do with that? And then of course I've got to follow through on that. And I love the idea of the language, and you're actually planting seeds
Mm-hmm.
in their minds that you do it enough times, people start to think of you in that way. That's great. I love this. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the most challenging characteristic, do you think? And maybe you can even use yourself as an example. But what's that most challenging characteristic for that you see, and why?
Hmm. I think the values in action would honestly be the most challenging, not because we don't want to show our values, but are we being strategic about how we are showing our values in action,
Mm,
if that makes
okay.
sense?
Yeah.
As an organization, we say that we have certain values, but are we really being intentional about showing those values and how and the products and how we serve our people, what we do? And I think leaders need to think about that as well. And it's just something that we state, right? Well, these
Mm-hmm.
are my values, and then we just assume that we're somehow exhibiting those. And so I think that's the one that, interpersonal integrity, if you really are someone who's authentic and sincere and wants to engage with people, that's going to kind of come naturally to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's just that being intentional about showing your values.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And well, because we have a tendency to make a lot of assumptions around that,
Right.
right? Like what do you mean? I'm a good person, or I'm this way, or I'm values driven. And it's like, okay, so how has that been demonstrated in the last 24
Right.
hours? Oh, wow.
Right.
That's maybe not, right? If you have a hard time finding examples, then maybe, and just being intentional. Actually, our last guest that I was just talking with, he was talking about the intentionality of even creating value in the organization. And once he became aware of the fact that that was something that was important, and he started to put intention around it, it's kind of like knowing your strengths, right? Once you know
Right.
your strengths, you're like, oh my gosh, these are my top 5 strengths. Now you can be more intentional about how can I develop those strengths
Mm-hmm.
as well. So that's really good. So talk about this difference again, coming back to women, is this difference between asserting yourself
Hmm.
and being appearing like you're aggressive, like the arrogant type, because like it's one thing if a guy does it, it's like, oh, he's,
Yeah.
he's got all that, he's a powerhouse. It's a woman does that sometimes, it can be seen as like, wow, she's it doesn't come across always the same way. So how do you
Mm.
balance that so that
You
it
know,
comes across the way that you intended it?
this topic comes up all the time. So it's a great point that you're bringing up, Nicole, because women say this, right? I'm trying to be assertive without being aggressive, perceived as aggressive. And and I say, first of all, it starts with kind of being the leader that you're trying to constantly get out ahead of things. So
Okay.
you're clearly articulating what you need from others, what those expectations are, in a way as a gracious communicator, not as somebody who's micromanaging, but okay, I want to give you all this information so that you feel confident going forward with it, right? And so creating a sense of you're empowering and equipping people. And then when you need to be assertive, this needs to be done by this time. People feel like you've been giving them all that good information along the way. But for women, especially in the delivery of the assertive, confident, this is what needs to happen message, this is going to sound so just surfacey. I think it's so much about our body language and our tone of voice
Yeah, I
because
agree.
men don't have as much of a range of pitch as women do. And they're also kind of staying in that tenor bass section. Women, we can be excited and our voice is going to, right, it's going to fluctuate, it's going to get louder. And I think we just have to be really intentional about how we're giving that message and that if we're trying to not be seen as aggressive, that our body language is looking non-aggressive. Like, hey
Yeah.
guys, this is what really needs to happen, right? Mm. But it's also being really aware of our voice and how it's coming across, and that we're not speaking too fast or too loud or too high pitched. And once again, that's just self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's recognizing how you might not even know that you're using that tone of voice. So just becoming more aware of it and being really intentional in the moment to, and even practicing the messages. If you know you've got to deliver a message, practice it, record yourself saying it. What do you look like? What do you sound like?
I was just thinking about that as you were saying that
Yeah.
is, oh, do it in the mirror. I've done that in the mirror. So one of my first presentations that I ever did when I had kind of changed the topic, right? So here I am. I've learned this new topic in a sense from a mentor of mine, and I was teaching these principles. I'd bought a franchise, and so I'm teaching basically his material, right?
Mhm.
So I knew how to present. So I was, the authority was there, all the things were there. I had inadvertently stacked the room with like world-class trainers, friends of mine. I'm like, oh, come out, I'm doing this thing. They're like, oh yeah. So I had like 5 of them in the room. And then I realized, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Right. Because they know, right? They know how to present really well. One of them comes up to me afterwards and says, Nicole, you're doing great. You might want to smile every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I was like, oh my goodness, because I have a resting serious face.
Yes. Okay.
And I have to learn to and remind myself to smile. Otherwise, I look like I'm not having any fun. And so when I'm communicating with people, it can, like you said, the tone, the body language, all of that makes up the majority of our communication. So it's not what I say, it's the music I play. And so I've
I
had to
love
learn
that.
that. But I
Love
just
that.
I just never forget Chris coming to me and saying, you might want to, and he was really perfect. Like he did it so well, right? So
Yeah.
I didn't feel bad about it, but he was like, you might want to smile every once in a while. I was
Well,
like,
and
oh,
we don't know. I mean, and that is the thing. And the example that I bring up to people all the time when we're talking about nonverbal and paralanguage, all of that that goes with our voice, all those aspects. I say, okay, we've all recorded our voicemail message on our phone, and then we go back and we listen to it, and we're like, who is
ooh,
that?
yeah,
Right? So we're not even aware of what we sound like as
yeah,
a voice. And so recording yourself, we teach this all the time with public speaking skills, because you don't know what you're doing non-verbally. You may be fidgeting, using your hands too much, playing with your hair, who knows what. And absolutely, you don't know what you're doing with your face. And in a serious moment, you're so focused on the message
Yeah.
that you're not thinking about the delivery so much. And then there's probably a heightened sense of just anxiety around having to deliver some type of tense or, assertive message. And so we really do need to think about how can we disarm people non-verbally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think about like empathy and authority. I was reading a book recently and it was talking about this idea in a different context, but it applies here. This idea of having kind of like that empathy and authority blended together
Mm.
as a leader is very powerful, right? So
Mhm.
that they know you care, and they also know that you're in authority, and there's something that needs to be done, and you're moving, and they're also responsible for the outcome as well. And so it's like, hey, we need to do this because this is important. So yeah, this is so good. This
Yeah.
is so good.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
You were talking to Davna
Hmm.
not that long ago, and she was on the show, and she specializes in written communication, and you specialize more in the verbal communication and the presence, of like how you're showing up in meetings and so forth. What is the difference between those two, and what do
Mm.
people need to be aware of?
Well, I mean, she and I had a great conversation around it, but in both, you're thinking about answering the questions, right? Who is my audience? So, what is the message? Why does it matter to them? What am I really trying to accomplish? So, whether it's written, at the end of this email, what do I want people to remember to take away? And how am I structuring it in a way that they're actually going to read it and remember those things? It's not 2.5 pages long. In spoken communication, we are thinking the same things. Okay, who's my audience? Why do they care? How do I go ahead and answer that question at the beginning? Like, hey, this is what I'm about to share with you, and this is why it matters to you. This is what I want you to remember in 20 minutes after this meeting. But you need to answer those questions for yourself so that you can construct those messages really in a way that is engaging and is memorable, because it doesn't matter if it's not engaging and memorable, right? But the main difference between that written and verbal is that when we have an opportunity for face-to-face, virtual is kind of replicating that face-to-face, or on the phone, people's attention spans are so short. You've got like an 8 second, I mean, you can lose somebody's attention in probably less than 8 seconds. So it is about leading with, hey, meaning, and being someone who is a clear, concise communicator. So, I mean, there's so many parallels, but I think you do need to think about all those things we were talking about. If you're going to verbalize it, it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it. I love it's the music behind yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think one of the things that I notice public speakers do a lot. They'll do like these icebreakers, and some people can do it well. Like I know Joel Osteen incorporates it into his
Yeah.
message, and it works.
Hmm. Hmm.
Unless you can really do it well, though. I know it's like you're sitting there going, okay, get to the message, right? Like,
Mm.
what are we talking
Mhm.
about here? So, and I think there's some value in that. One of my mentors, Blair Singer, who's actually who I bought the franchise with years ago, he, funny enough, he's really small in stature. Like, so he's 5'4", 5'5", I don't know. He's a little guy, but
Yeah.
he's like fills a room with his presence. He's just
Uh-huh.
amazing. He said, you're going to start off a presentation, and the first 2 minutes, they're going to be the most skeptical and you're going to be the most nervous. And
Hmm.
so you got to go into their world, connect with the audience and go into their world first. And
Yeah.
then you invite them into yours. And I think that's like what you're talking about, right? And so it's this idea of them going, okay, what's in it for me? Teresa Easler, also, who was on this show, both of them have been on the show in years past. And Teresa said, what's in it for me and why do I care? These are the two questions they're asking themselves. Like, well, is this relevant? Do I need to pay attention? And it's not selfish. It's just that's how our mind works, because we only have a certain amount of bandwidth to pay attention. And so, we want to make sure that it's relevant to us. So this material is so important, not just for executive leaders and companies, but I think of like all the entrepreneurs that listen to this show, and aspiring leaders as well. I mean, you're either presenting, whether you're presenting to a board or you're presenting to your boss, your supervisor, looking for a promotion, presenting to an investor, presenting to customers, potential clients, strategic, advisors or strategic partners. I mean, it kind of is pervasive, right? This idea of being able to show up and be heard, be seen, be heard, be understood, and be able to influence action going forward. So yeah, thank you. I know you've got a free gift for our listeners as well. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, yeah. And so when we had talked about this, I said, anyone that LinkedIn is really kind of my forum. I'm on there. I'm very responsive. But if you connect to me on LinkedIn, so you don't have to just follow, but if you go to the little three dots and connect, then if anyone would like kind of a handout about executive presence, the 10 characteristics, the questions to ask yourself, the next steps, then I have that as a PDF, and I'm happy to send it to anyone who wants to message me and just kind of share that information, because I think this is information that, we're all in this, how do we learn and grow and what's our next? And we have to, constantly be polishing, right? And be reflective and project, like, what are the things that we want to accomplish and how do we get there? So I'm happy to share kind of good, I don't know, golden tips about executive presence, and hopefully people will get something out of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and I think after COVID, when everybody kind of went into the Zoom mode, and now kind of coming back into not the past, go back to normal, but a new normal. There's also a leveling up in that process, right? Because we kind of got comfortable. It's like, oh, I'm at home. I can wear my sweatpants and my sweatshirt and whatever. And it's like, hey, yeah, that was fine during COVID, but we're in the pandemic. We're past that now. And, so it's stepping it up, and we can always learn. So that's really, really good. Well, we'll make sure that link to your LinkedIn is in the show notes. And you also co-authored a book, Engineered to Speak. So we'll make sure that's in the notes.
Sure.
Like you said, you don't have a website, which means your presence precedes you, because, people just find you on LinkedIn. So there you go. You can use that as your website.
I have limited bandwidth, Nicole. So I'm like,
I don't need a
that's
website.
Where I'm living. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's so much information and so many platforms out there, just to focus on what is the most important. So thank you so much for that. And just such a pleasure spending time with you and learning from you. And thank you so much for being here today.
I've enjoyed it. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I always say this: leaders of transformation take action. So for our listeners and viewers, take action on something you learned here today. Maybe it's sitting down and saying, what are those 3 words that currently people would describe me as? And then looking and saying, what are the words that I would like to be described and starting to incorporate that into your language. Maybe it's getting the free offer and the free download, the PDF, reaching out to Alexa on LinkedIn and getting that so that you can work on those 10 characteristics. What if you just took one a month and started to develop them? Wow. So you don't have to do them all at once. You start to develop them and stack those qualities and characteristics, and maybe even leveling it up. Maybe say, yeah, my presence is pretty good. I feel like I'm confident. I feel like I'm showing up well. How can you take it to that next level? Whatever it is, I always encourage that you take action on something that you learned, because nothing happens without action, right? Transformation begins with awareness, and then there's a choice of what I'm going to do with that awareness. But then there's the follow through. It's the actually doing something about it and sticking with it. Otherwise, it's just great information and you just keep moving on. So, not to belabor the point, I encourage you to take action on something that you learned here today. That's what makes the difference. And we'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, reach out to us. Let us know how this has impacted you. Let us know how we can support you along your journey as you become a leader of transformation. You increase your impact and your influence in your respective arena. We'd love to hear from you. And again, thank you for being here. And we look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation.